Beneath the cobblestones of crowded medieval marketplaces, where merchants haggled over spices and silks, an even more precious trade was happening in secret, one that could cost a person their life. Hidden below the noise and chaos of daily commerce lay vaults filled with forbidden knowledge, carefully guarded by those brave enough to defy authority. These weren't just any libraries, they were time capsules of radical ideas, preserving texts that threatened to rewrite history, science, and faith. Imagine the weight of that responsibility, knowing that a single discovered manuscript could spark revolutions or condemn its protector to the flames. What kind of knowledge was so dangerous it had to be buried beneath the busiest places in the medieval world? Picture revolutionary astronomical theories that challenged the heavens, medical texts deemed too advanced for their time, or religious writings that defied the doctrines of powerful institutions. These hidden libraries weren't just storing books, they were safeguarding futures that authorities tried desperately to erase. The people who built them weren't merely collectors, they were rebels, scholars, and visionaries who believed in the power of ideas enough to risk everything. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 25 of these extraordinary secret archives, each with its own story of courage, intrigue, and defiance. You'll discover how these underground sanctuaries operated in plain sight, who accessed them, and why their contents were considered too dangerous for the world above. By the time we're done, you'll see medieval marketplaces in a whole new light, not just as centers of trade, but as fronts for a shadow war over knowledge itself. So let's begin the journey into these buried chambers where the past guarded the future in whispers and ink. Marketplaces were the perfect disguise for these underground troves of knowledge, not just because of the noise and crowds, but because of something far more clever. Think about it. Who would suspect a humble merchant's stall or a bustling tavern of hiding revolutionary ideas? The chaos of daily trade created a natural smokescreen. Guards and officials were too busy breaking up petty disputes or collecting taxes to notice the quiet movement of forbidden texts beneath their feet. And the people who frequented these places, traveling merchants, pilgrims, even wandering scholars, could blend in effortlessly, carrying scrolls and manuscripts in plain sight, disguised as ordinary goods. But the real brilliance lay in the architecture. Many medieval marketplaces sat atop ancient cellars, crypts, or forgotten storage tunnels, their original purposes long faded from memory. These spaces were repurposed with hidden doors, false floors, and even decoy rooms to throw off suspicion. Some libraries were accessed through trapdoors in kitchens or stables, where the smell of hay or smoke masked the scent of parchment and ink. Others used the marketplace's own infrastructure like water channels or grain chutes as secret passageways. The very design of these hiding spots mirrored the dual nature of medieval life, one world bustling above, another whispering below. And let's not forget the social camouflage. Marketplaces were hubs of gossip where rumors spread faster than the plague. A stranger asking about hidden books would stand out instantly, but a merchant checking inventory or a monk retrieving supplies could come and go without question. The guardians of these libraries weren't just hiding books, they were mastering the art of deception, turning the marketplace's own rhythms into their shield. It wasn't just about physical secrecy, it was about psychological cunning, knowing that the best way to protect a dangerous idea was to make it invisible in plain sight. What's truly remarkable is how these hidden libraries thrived for generations, often right under the noses of kings and inquisitors. Their survival wasn't just luck, it was a testament to the ingenuity of those who refused to let knowledge die. Every time a forbidden text was copied in candlelight, Every time a trusted visitor was led down a concealed staircase, they were stitching together a shadow network of learning that would outlast empires. These weren't just spaces for storage, they were living, breathing acts of resistance, proof that even in the darkest ages, light found a way to linger. The genius of these hidden libraries wasn't just in their location, it was in how they exploited the very rhythms of medieval commerce to stay undetected. Take the constant flow of goods, for example. A merchant unloading barrels of wine or bolts of cloth was such an ordinary sight that no one would question a few extra trips to the cellar. But beneath those same barrels might lie a trapdoor leading to a chamber lined with shelves of forbidden manuscripts. The movement of people and products provided perfect cover for smuggling knowledge, with contraband texts tucked between shipments of spices or hidden in false-bottomed carts. Then there was the matter of trust. Marketplaces thrived on networks of relationships, guilds, trading partners, even rival merchants who knew when to look the other way. A bookseller might openly display approved texts on his stall while secretly maintaining an underground archive for trusted clients. These keepers of forbidden knowledge weren't working alone. They were part of an unspoken alliance of scribes, translators, and couriers who operated like a shadow guild. A monk could pass a dangerous book to a wool merchant, who'd carry it to another city hidden among his wares, where a blacksmith's apprentice would retrieve it and deliver it to the next hands willing to preserve it. The physical layout of these spaces was equally clever. Some libraries were tucked beneath guild halls, where the comings and goings of members masked unusual activity. Others hid behind layers of legitimate business, like a tavern cellar that appeared to store ale kegs but concealed a second, more secret room behind a movable wall. The most daring setups even used sound as a weapon against discovery. Beneath a busy metalsmith stall, the constant hammering would drown out the scrape of a chair or the turning of a page, while the heat from the forge above helped control humidity to preserve delicate parchment. But perhaps the most audacious trick was how these libraries weaponized bureaucracy. In cities with strict book inspections, some keepers registered their hidden collections as commercial inventories or guild records, documents so mundane that officials rarely scrutinized them. A chest labeled account ledgers might hold treatises on alchemy, while a crate of tax receipts could conceal maps challenging the church's view of the world. The very systems designed to suppress dissent became tools for its survival. What's striking is how these methods mirrored the ideas they protected. Just as revolutionary philosophies questioned surface-level truths, these libraries thrived by making the ordinary extraordinary. A grain chute wasn't just a grain chute, it was a lifeline for knowledge. A merchant wasn't just a merchant, he was a smuggler of futures. And in that duality lay their power. They didn't just hide from authority, they rewrote the rules of the game, using society's own structures against it. The survival of these libraries wasn't just luck or secrecy, it was a masterclass in outthinking oppression. The guardians of these underground libraries weren't just lone rebels, they were part of intricate secret societies, each with its own rituals, codes, and layers of protection. Take the alchemists, for example. To outsiders, they were just eccentric men tinkering with metals and potions. But beneath their workshops lay vaults of forbidden texts on everything from early chemistry to philosophical treatises that challenged the nature of creation itself. These groups didn't just hide books, they disguised them. A volume on astronomy might be rebound with the cover of a prayer book, or a revolutionary medical text could be tucked inside a hollowed-out ledger. Some even wrote in cipher, using symbols only initiates could decode, like a recipe for turning lead into gold that secretly detailed the steps to spiritual enlightenment. Then there were the heretical sects like the Cathars or the Beguines, who risked execution to preserve ideas the church deemed dangerous. Their libraries weren't just collections, they were acts of defiance. A single misplaced word could doom an entire community, so they developed ingenious systems of compartmentalization. One member might copy a forbidden text but never know where it was stored. Another would transport it but never read it, and the keeper of the library, they might never meet the scribe or the courier, ensuring that even under torture, no single person could expose the entire network. But perhaps the most daring tactic was the use of decoys. Some societies maintained small, disposable libraries filled with mildly controversial texts, just enough to satisfy suspicious authorities if discovered, while the real treasures lay hidden elsewhere. Imagine an inquisitor triumphantly hauling away a chest of books on herbal remedies, unaware that a trapdoor beneath it led to a chamber holding works that could upend the medieval worldview. These groups played a dangerous game of misdirection, turning the very act of searching into a distraction. What's striking is how these societies mirrored the knowledge they protected. Just as radical ideas challenged surface-level truths, these groups thrived by existing in plain sight. A guild of stonemasons might secretly preserve geometry texts that contradicted religious dogma. A circle of midwives could safeguard herbal manuscripts the church had banned. They understood that the best way to hide wasn't to disappear, it was to blend in so perfectly that no one thought to look deeper. The survival of these libraries hinged on more than secrecy. It required unshakable loyalty. Members often took blood oaths or symbolic vows, binding themselves to silence. Betrayal was met with exile or worse, but the greater fear wasn't punishment, it was the loss of knowledge itself. These guardians weren't just preserving books, they were safeguarding the future, one copied page at a time. Their stories remind us that ideas are fragile things, and sometimes the most powerful act of rebellion is simply remembering what others tried to erase. Beneath the bloody sawdust and swinging carcasses of a Parisian butcher's stall, where the scent of raw meat masked the smell of candle wax and ink, a secret knock could open the way to one of history's most dangerous libraries. This wasn't just a hidden room, it was the Alchemists Vault, a subterranean labyrinth where the boundaries between science and heresy blurred. Behind its concealed door lay manuscripts that dared to question the very fabric of medieval reality, formulas for transmuting metals, diagrams of celestial mechanics the church condemned, and experiments documenting the behavior of substances in ways that defied ancient dogma. What made these texts so threatening? Consider the audacity of their contents. One recovered fragment described a method for distilling liquids using glassware that wouldn't become mainstream for centuries, a process that hinted at principles later foundational to chemistry. Another scroll mapped planetary movements with eerie precision, contradicting the approved geocentric model. These weren't just academic exercises, they were quiet rebellions against the intellectual limits of the age. The alchemists understood the risk. Their works were written in coded language, with symbols like the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, serving as both allegory and camouflage, disguising radical ideas as mystical nonsense to the untrained eye. The library's location beneath a butcher's stall was no accident. The constant noise of cleavers and haggling customers drowned out suspicious sounds, while the visceral chaos of the trade above made it the last place authorities would associate with delicate scholarship. Only initiates knew the sequence: 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 slow knocks on a seemingly ordinary barrel. Behind it, a narrow staircase spiraled down to a chamber where shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes, each a ticking time bomb of ideas. When the crackdown came, the guild's precautions couldn't save everything. Flames consumed thousands of pages in the public squares of Paris, their ashes carried away by the wind. But some texts survived, smuggled out in the dead of night or buried in lead-lined chests beneath nearby buildings. A few even resurfaced centuries later, their predictions about the natural world proven shockingly accurate. The tragedy isn't just what was lost, it's how close we came to a renaissance that might have bloomed 200 years earlier. Those fragments that slipped through the net became seeds for future revolutions, proof that even the most tightly guarded knowledge has a way of outliving its persecutors. What lingers most hauntingly is the realization that for every surviving page, countless others vanished forever. What breakthroughs died with them? What paths might science have taken if those shelves had remained intact? The Alchemists Vault reminds us that history isn't just written by the victors, it's also whispered by the ones who hid in the shadows, daring to imagine a world not yet ready for their truths. Beneath the flickering lanterns of a silk road caravansarai, where camels groaned under the weight of spices and silk, an even more precious cargo moved in silence. Behind a false wall in the wine cellar, accessible only to those who knew to count the bricks in a specific sequence, lay a library that defied empires. Here, Persian star charts rubbed shoulders with Chinese treatises on gunpowder, Greek philosophy, mingled with Buddhist sutras banned by decree, texts so dangerous that owning them could mean death in a dozen kingdoms. This wasn't just a collection of books, it was a shadow academy where the brightest minds of the medieval world traded ideas too radical for daylight. The genius of this library lay in its neutrality. Caravansarais were the medieval equivalent of international airports, places where Mongols, Arabs, Byzantines, and Europeans crossed paths under temporary truces. No single authority controlled them, making these way stations perfect for clandestine exchanges. A Nestorian Christian monk could discreetly pass a manuscript on anatomy to a Muslim physician, who'd copy it and leave the duplicate for a Jewish trader headed west. The texts traveled further than their authors ever could, hidden in bales of cotton or nested inside hollowed-out saddlebags. What made these scrolls so explosive? Imagine a 9th century map accurately depicting the curvature of the Earth centuries before Columbus, or algebraic equations from India that would later revolutionize European mathematics knowledge that threatened the cosmological and political order of entire civilizations. But the real masterpiece was the library's cataloging system. Unlike traditional archives organized by subject or author, these texts were tagged by risk level. A red silk thread bound the most incendiary works like a Tang dynasty scroll questioning imperial divinity, while green threads marked texts merely frowned upon, such as advanced metallurgy manuals. Visitors were vetted through an elaborate ritual involving shared poetry verses and chess moves, ensuring that only those committed to preserving knowledge, not exploiting it, gained access. The librarians themselves were polyglots, often fluent in 4 or 5 languages, capable of translating sensitive passages on the spot to prevent misunderstandings that could spark conflicts. The legacy of this hidden archive echoes in ways we rarely acknowledge. When Fibonacci introduced Arabic numerals to Europe, he likely encountered them not in some grand university, but in a shadowy caravansarai cellar like this one. The Renaissance didn't spring fully formed from Italy. It was seeded by ideas that traveled the Silk Road in disguise, stripped of their origins to protect those who carried them. A Persian medical text banned in Baghdad might resurface in Venice attributed to an ancient Greek sage, its true pedigree erased for safety. What's most poignant is how these forbidden exchanges shaped the modern world while remaining invisible. The Caravansarai library wasn't destroyed by raids or fanatics. It was rendered obsolete by the very progress it helped create. As printing presses spread and universities grew bolder, the need for such extreme secrecy faded. But for centuries, this underground network was the immune system of human thought, quietly distributing the intellectual antibodies that would eventually inoculate the world against ignorance. The books have long since crumbled, but their ideas, like the caravans that carried them, never truly stopped moving. In the heart of Toledo, where three faiths collided under the Spanish sun, the most dangerous ideas weren't found in mosques, synagogues, or cathedrals. They lay hidden beneath the marketplace in a secret chamber known as the Heretics' Crypt. This wasn't just a library, it was a sanctuary for thoughts too revolutionary for any religion to tolerate. Jewish Kabbalists, Muslim philosophers, and Christian mystics who questioned church doctrine risked their lives to contribute to this underground archive, creating a melting pot of forbidden knowledge that defied the rigid boundaries of their time. The Crypt's collection read like a catalogue of everything the medieval world feared. Arabic star charts predicting planetary motion with terrifying accuracy sat beside Hebrew medical texts detailing anatomy in ways that challenged biblical literalism. Christian dissidents smuggled in translations of Greek philosophy that undermined the concept of papal infallibility. But the real heresy wasn't the content alone, it was the collaboration. In a world where interfaith dialogue could get you burned at the stake, these scholars secretly traded ideas, annotating each other's works in the margins with questions and counterarguments. A single page might bear notes in Arabic, Latin, and Ladino, a physical testament to the power of ideas to transcend dogma. Accessing the crypt required more than just knowing its location. Visitors had to navigate a maze of tunnels designed to confuse intruders, some rigged with sand traps that would swallow unwanted guests. The librarians, often former merchants who'd faked their own deaths to avoid persecution, used a system of mirror signals and coded knocks to vet newcomers. Only those who could answer 3 riddles, each in a different language, were led to the inner chamber. The precautions were extreme but necessary. A single misstep could doom not just the library, but the fragile network of free thinkers across Iberia. The betrayal came from an unexpected quarter, a disgruntled scribe who'd been denied access to the most sensitive texts. When inquisitors stormed the crypt in 1484, they found shelves half empty. The keepers had been preparing for this moment for decades. Critical works had already been dispersed along trade routes, hidden inside hollowed-out loaves of bread or sewn into the linings of pilgrims' robes. Some reached as far as Florence, where they quietly influenced Renaissance scholars. Others surfaced in Constantinople, where they were copied and recopied until their origins were untraceable. What if those ideas hadn't been forced underground? Imagine a 15th century where Toledo's marketplace openly traded not just spices and silk, but the radical notion that faith and reason could coexist. The Crypt's legacy is a haunting reminder of how much brighter the so-called Dark Ages might have been if fear hadn't dictated what truths were allowed to survive. The irony is profound. The very texts meant to be erased ended up shaping the modern world, proving that no amount of fire can burn an idea whose time has come. Beneath the reek of salt-crusted fish and the shouted prices of Venetian vendors, the Rialto market concealed a secret that would make the Republic's censors shudder, a clandestine press operating right under the Doge's nose. While merchants above haggled over the day's catch, below their feet, printers inked pages of works so explosive they could topple reputations or spark rebellions. This wasn't just a hidden library. It was a full-fledged underground publishing house where banned texts rolled off makeshift presses disguised as wine barrels, their contents smuggled out in the bellies of salted cod or folded into the lining of noblewomen's gowns. The operation's brilliance lay in its layers of deception. Printers posed as fishmongers' apprentices, their hands stained not just with squid ink but with the real thing. A stall selling octopus and clams might house a trapdoor leading to a cellar where political satires lampooning the Council of Ten dried beside illustrations of human anatomy deemed too graphic for public consumption. The most dangerous works, like Machiavelli's early drafts questioning Venetian oligarchy, were printed on paper mixed with seaweed pulp, designed to dissolve in water if authorities raided the premises. What made Venice's black market unique was its audacity. Unlike other hidden libraries that preserved old knowledge, this one created new heresies daily. Printers worked from movable type smuggled out of Germany, producing everything from erotic verse penned by anonymous patricians to translations of Averro's philosophy that challenged church doctrine. The real masterstroke, corruption as camouflage. Warehouse inspectors were bribed with rare spices or promises of discreet gambling debts erased, ensuring their reports never mentioned the odd hum of presses beneath the market's din. Closest call came in 1589 when an informant tipped off the Doge's secret police. Raiders stormed a suspected print shop, only to find a decoy operation churning out fake horoscopes and bawdy songs. The real presses had vanished hours earlier, their type melted down into counterfeit coins and their operators fleeing on gondolas with false bottoms loaded with manuscripts. By dawn, the entire operation had relocated to a new hideout beneath a convent's laundry, where steaming vats of linen masked the sound of typesetting. The legacy of this underground network rippled far beyond Venice. Voltaire allegedly obtained a smuggled copy of a Rialto printed treatise on religious tolerance that later influenced his writings. Galileo's disciples used its distribution channels to circulate forbidden astronomy notes after his trial. What began as a local black market became a shadow highway for Enlightenment ideas, proving that even the most tightly controlled societies can't suppress curiosity forever. The fishmongers have long since vanished, but their secret lives remind us that sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't writing the truth, it's making sure it gets read. In the bustling cloth halls of medieval Bruges, where fortunes were made trading Flemish wool and Venetian silks, the most valuable commodity wasn't fabric, it was ideas. Beneath the vaulted ceilings where merchants sealed deals with handshakes and gold, a secret library thrived, its contents so explosive they could unravel the feudal order itself. The Guild of Shadows, as they called themselves, weren't just wealthy traders. They were custodians of forbidden economic theories that challenged divine right with cold, hard arithmetic. Their hidden archive beneath the marketplace contained treatises on interest-bearing loans, proto-unionization strategies for weavers, and even early blueprints for stock exchanges concepts that threatened to shift power from castle to counting house. What made these texts so dangerous? Imagine a world where kings and bishops dictated the value of labor and goods by decree. Now picture a ledger proving that prices should fluctuate based on supply and demand, or a pamphlet arguing that serfs deserved wages for their work. These weren't just academic musings, they were intellectual dynamite. The Guild's most controversial scroll, the Silent Ledger, laid out a radical premise. Wealth wasn't bestowed by God through nobility, it was created through trade, skill, and innovation. For feudal lords dependent on peasant labor and tithes, this idea was existential heresy. The Guild's protection scheme was as sophisticated as their economics. Members paid a clandestine tax not in coin, but in bribes to local officials and church censors. A well-timed donation to a bishop's pet construction project might ensure his inspectors overlooked a suspicious shipment of books. A strategically placed loan to a tax collector could guarantee his silence about certain cellar renovations. Even the library's location was a stroke of psychological genius. Hidden beneath the cloth hall, where the clatter of looms and the stench of dye vats masked any unusual activity, it sat directly under the noses of the very authorities who sought to destroy it. Access required more than wealth, it demanded initiation. Prospective members underwent a year-long trial, during which they'd be given fragments of texts to copy and distribute anonymously. Only those who demonstrated both discretion and ideological commitment earned the right to descend the spiral staircase behind a false tapestry in the guildmaster's office. The library itself was a masterpiece of misdirection shelves disguised as wine racks, accounting manuals with cipher-laden margins, even a decoy burn room filled with mildly controversial texts to sacrifice if discovered. When these ideas finally surfaced, the ripple effects transformed Europe. The concept of interest-bearing loans, once condemned as usury, became the foundation of modern banking. Treatises on fair wages planted early seeds for labor movements, but the real revelation lies in what almost didn't happen. Had the guild's cash been discovered even a decade earlier, before the rise of merchant cities, these ideas might have been eradicated entirely. The economic revolution that birthed the middle class, funded voyages of discovery, and ultimately toppled feudalism could have died in that cellar, leaving us trapped in a world where wealth and power never truly separated. The Guild of Shadows' greatest legacy isn't just the theories they preserved, it's the proof that commerce, when paired with courage, can be its own form of revolution. Their story whispers an unsettling question. What transformative ideas are we suppressing today, simply because they don't fit the economic dogma of our age? The marketplace may look different now, but the battle over who gets to define value and who profits from it rages on. Beneath the butcher shops of Bologna's Piazza Maggiore, where the scent of blood and herbs hung thick in the air, a secret brotherhood of physicians and artists defied the church's most sacred taboo. While vendors above sold cuts of meat to housewives and cooks, below their feet lay a library of human anatomy, so precise it could have come from the future. These weren't just textbooks, they were masterpieces of clandestine science, filled with illustrations of muscles, organs, and veins mapped in shocking detail, each stroke of the quill an act of heresy punishable by burning at the stake. What made these documents so revolutionary? Picture a world where the church declared the human body a mystery only God could understand, where dissection was considered sacrilege. Now imagine a single page from Bologna's hidden archive, a drawing of the heart's valves so accurate it predated accepted medical knowledge by 300 years. These anatomists didn't just sketch what they saw, they documented blood flow, nerve pathways, even early hypotheses about germ theory, all while authorities upstairs preached that illness was divine punishment. The library's crowning jewel was a series of flayed, muscle-men illustrations, their bodies peeled back layer by layer like living maps, revealing structures no textbook dared describe. Accessing this treasure trove required more than just medical credentials. Prospective members underwent a grueling initiation. First, they'd be led blindfolded through the market's sewer tunnels, then made to perform a mock dissection on a pig while reciting Gaelic theory flawlessly, all to test both their knowledge and their ability to lie under pressure. Only then would they be taken to the library's entrance, a false meat locker behind a tripe seller's stall, its hinges greased with lard to silence the door. Inside, the air reeked of vinegar and quicklime, chemicals used to preserve both cadavers and parchment from decay. The anatomist's greatest innovation wasn't their science, it was their deception. They disguised their work as religious art, labeling dissections as moral allegories, and hiding surgical diagrams inside illuminated Bibles. A sketch of a brain might be framed as the seat of the soul, with enough pious symbolism to fool casual inspectors. When raids loomed, entire volumes could be disassembled in minutes. their pages sewn into the linings of merchants' cloaks or rolled inside hollowed-out salami casings. The most daring trick, bribing grave robbers to supply fresh cadavers, then smuggling them into the city disguised as sides of beef on market day, a macabre joke that played on the very stalls above their hiding place. The legacy of this underground library pulses through modern medicine. When Andreas Vesalius published his groundbreaking De Humani Corporis Fabrica in 1543, scholars marveled at its accuracy. Few realized he'd likely seen or even held copies of Bologna's forbidden texts, smuggled north by physicians fleeing the Inquisition. Those pages didn't just preserve knowledge, they shortcut centuries of medical progress, giving doctors clandestine insights into everything from appendicitis to circulatory disorders. How many plague victims might have lived if this research had been public? How many women survived childbirth because a midwife secretly studied these illustrations? The bitter irony lingers. The Church's fear of these texts only proved their power. By trying to suppress the mysteries of the body, they inadvertently created a blueprint for defiance, one that still reminds us today that no institution, no matter how powerful, can forever chain the human hunger to understand itself. The anatomists of Bologna didn't just hide books, they buried seeds that would eventually crack the very foundations of dogma, proving that even the most forbidden knowledge has a way of rising from the grave. Beneath the labyrinthine alleys of Fez's ancient souks, where the scent of saffron and leather mingled with the murmur of haggling merchants, a different kind of trade flourished in the shadows. Here, poets who dared to mock sultans and question clerics hid their verses in a secret library carved into the earth beneath a carpet seller's stall. These weren't just poems, they were landmines of dissent, wrapped in metaphor and coded imagery, capable of igniting rebellions with nothing but ink and audacity. What made these words so lethal? Consider the precision of their disguise. A line praising the nightingale's song might secretly ridicule a ruler's vanity, while an ode to a rose could lament the people's suffering under tyranny. The poets mastered double meanings, crafting verses that sounded pious to authorities but burned with revolutionary fire to those who knew the key. One surviving fragment describes a withering garden, a thinly veiled critique of corrupt taxation, while another uses the metaphor of a broken loom to lament the unraveling of justice. The true genius lay in their oral transmission. Even if written copies were burned, the poems lived on in memory, passed from trader to weaver, student to scholar, in the very market squares where the authorities patrolled. The library's survival was a testament to its decentralized design. Unlike traditional archives, this one had no single location. Scrolls were tucked into the hollowed-out legs of market stools, sewn into the linings of camel saddles, even pressed into discs of dried apricot paste that could be eaten after memorization. When raids occurred, and they did, often the poets simply rebuilt. A network of scribes, many of them women writing under male pseudonyms, tirelessly recopied lost works, adding new layers of cipher with each iteration. The most dangerous poems were never written down at all, instead entrusted to a chain of reciters who'd whisper them only to those who could prove their loyalty through intricate verbal tests. Some verses became so potent they transcended their origins. The Cassida of the Silent, a poem protesting the silencing of scholars, evolved into a rallying cry across North Africa. Its closing lines, "Even if they cut every tongue, the stones will sing our words," scratched onto mosque walls and prison cells for centuries. Another, The Merchant's Scales, which denounced unfair taxes, was adapted into folk songs that spread as far as Andalusia, disguised as children's rhymes. The true irony, the very brutality meant to erase these poets ensured their immortality. Every public burning of their scrolls, every execution of a suspected writer, only cemented their words in collective memory. Today, fragments resurface in unlikely places, a line etched into a medieval well in Marrakech, a stanza woven into a Berber tapestry. They remind us that tyranny's greatest fear isn't the sword, but the syllable, not the army, but the idea wrapped in beauty and whispered in the dark. The poets of Fez knew something their oppressors didn't. You can kill a rebel, but you can't kill a rhyme. Beneath the clamor of Cologne's fishmongers and cloth merchants, where the Rhine's trade routes converged, a quieter revolution was being archived in a cellar guarded by women the church had tried to erase. The library of St. Ursula's secret sisterhood wasn't just a collection of texts, it was a manifesto for a world that never was. Here, treatises on women's education lay beside midwifery manuals asserting female bodily autonomy, and theological arguments for women preaching were sewn into the linings of hymnals. These weren't just books, they were blueprints for a parallel renaissance, one where women's voices weren't footnotes but foundations. The Sisterhood's most radical text, the Beehive Dialogues, used honeycomb metaphors to argue for decentralized female leadership. The hive thrives not by the will of drones, one passage insisted, but by the labor of countless unseen wings. Another scroll on the education of girls dared to suggest that women's minds, not just their wombs, were worthy of cultivation, listing subjects from geometry to rhetoric. Such ideas weren't merely controversial, they threatened the feudal order itself. A woman who could read contracts might challenge her husband's property claims. One who mastered logic could dismantle the sermon silencing her. Preservation demanded ingenuity. The sisters developed a lexicon of textile codes. A knotted fringe on a scroll meant copy and destroy the original, while a blue thread woven into parchment signaled high danger. They trained sparrows to carry fragments of bandworks to nearby convents, tying tiny scrolls to the birds' legs with silk that dissolved in rain if intercepted. Their greatest deception, binding subversive texts inside approved devotional books with incendiary passages hidden beneath layers of pious illustrations. Peel back the gold leaf on a saint's halo, and you'd find marginalia debating whether Mary Magdalene was an apostle, not a penitent. The crackdown came swiftly when a betrayed novice confessed under torture. In 1522, armed men stormed the cellar, tossing manuscripts onto bonfires that burned for 3 days. But the Sisterhood had anticipated this moment. Days earlier, 12 women had slipped into the marketplace crowd, each swallowing a rolled parchment sealed in wax, a last-ditch effort to carry the words inside their bodies. One survived the journey to Strasbourg, where she coughed up the tiny scroll in a safe house. Its contents, copied onto linen bandages, later surfaced in a Dutch midwife's manual. What echoes of this library linger? A fragment arguing for girls' schools resurfaced in 17th century Quaker communities. A recipe for ink made from oak gall and iron, developed to withstand damp cellar conditions, became standard for clandestine printing. But the greater loss is the unwritten future those texts envisioned. Imagine a reformation where women debated theology openly, or a scientific revolution where female scholars named the stars. The tragedy isn't just what was burned, it's how many brilliant minds spent centuries relearning what Cologne's sisters already knew. That knowledge, once seeded, cannot be fully uprooted, even when its gardeners are erased from history. Beneath the bustling fruit stalls of Prague's Old Town Square, where merchants weighed apples and plums under the watchful eyes of Habsburg officials, a vault of celestial secrets lay buried. This wasn't just a collection of star charts, it was an astrologer's arsenal, filled with predictions so precise they terrified kings. The library's most infamous scroll, the Crimson Conjunction, had foretold the defenestration that would spark the 30 Years' War decades before it happened. Another, the lion's eclipse, accurately predicted the downfall of a Bohemian king to the very month. These weren't vague prophecies, they were mathematical calculations of rebellion and regime change, penned by scholars who understood that the stars didn't just guide sailors, they mapped the rise and fall of empires. What made these texts too dangerous to exist? Consider the political earthquake of a single accurate prophecy. If stargazers could plot the exact moment a monarch would lose favor, what stopped dissidents from timing their revolts to align with celestial omens? The library's keepers walked a razor's edge. Their craft was valued by rulers seeking personal horoscopes, but the same knowledge applied to nations became treason. Some manuscripts contained coded annotations linking planetary alignments to historical revolts, creating a playbook for future uprisings. A particularly chilling folio correlated solar flares with peasant rebellions, suggesting cosmic forces could ignite human desperation. The bunker's design was a masterpiece of subterfuge, accessed through a well shaft disguised as a failed water source. Its entrance lay beneath a grocer's stall selling astrologically blessed herbs, a perfect cover for the comings and goings of scholars. Inside, the walls were lined with lead to block dampness and, crucially, to prevent the telltale scent of ink and parchment from seeping into the market above. The real stroke of genius, the library's catalog system mirrored the zodiac itself. Texts were shelved according to the celestial events they documented, with volatile predictions like comets and eclipses stored in a locked iron cabinet labeled Harvest Records. For 80 years, the bunker's existence was Prague's best-kept secret. Even its patrons often didn't know its full location. They'd be led blindfolded through a maze of cellar tunnels, emerging in a chamber where candlelight flickered across astrolabes and armillary spheres. The system worked until 1620, when the library's last keeper, a blind astronomer named Jan Havel, died suddenly without revealing the vault's location. Authorities searching his home found only a single clue, a star chart pinned to the wall with a dagger, its tip pointing to a seemingly random spot in the marketplace. By the time they excavated the site, the most damning texts had vanished, likely smuggled out in barrels of fermenting cabbage, their acidic scent masking the paper's odor. The legacy of these forbidden forecasts lingers in unexpected ways. When Kepler formulated his laws of planetary motion, he reportedly studied fragments from the bunker's surviving texts not for their politics, but for their observational data. A scrap of vellum salvaged from a fishmonger's trash heap contained lunar calculations that matched Galileo's later work. The bitter irony, the very predictions meant to control history became tools to unlock the universe's mechanics. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't what these astrologers got right. It's what they chose not to record. Among the recovered scraps, one phrase recurs like a refrain: "The stars show but do not compel." In an age when rulers blamed comets for their misfortunes and preachers declared eclipses divine wrath, Prague's hidden stargazers understood a dangerous truth. The future isn't written in the stars, but in how we respond to their patterns. Their real heresy wasn't predicting upheaval, it was proving that power, no matter how celestial its pretensions, always trembles before those who can read the signs. Beneath the deafening clamor of Antwerp's trading floor, where merchants shouted bids for spices from the Orient and gold from the New World, a different kind of treasure changed hands in silence. Hidden beneath the floorboards of a mapmaker's stall, accessible only by lifting a loose tile disguised as a knot in the wood, lay the Cartographer's underground, a secret archive of maps so explosive they could topple empires. These weren't just charts of coastlines and currents, they were renderings of truth European powers had tried to erase, from indigenous trade networks older than Rome to lands colonizers claimed were undiscovered. What made these maps so dangerous? Take the infamous Codex Atlanticus, a scroll depicting the Amazon basin not as an empty wilderness, but as a crisscross of thriving villages and cultivated orchards, proof that the virgin land conquistadors described was already home to sophisticated civilizations. Another, the Mariner's Ghost, showed Polynesian star paths that could guide sailors across the Pacific without European instruments, undermining the myth of colonial navigational superiority. But the most coveted and contested was the Terra Incognita Folio, a collection of maps based on indigenous oral histories, detailing mineral deposits, medicinal plants, and even safe harbors sabotaged by locals to repel invaders. These weren't just geographical records, they were resistance manuals in ink and vellum. The library's survival hinged on deception. Cartographers perfected the art of the double map, innocent charts of European coastlines on top, with forbidden lands revealed only when held to candlelight. Others used inks that faded after 6 months, ensuring stolen copies would self-destruct. The real masterstroke was their distribution network. Smugglers rolled maps inside barrels of Flemish ale, their hoops stamped with constellations that signaled contents: Orion for Africa, Ursa Major for the Americas. Even the archive's location was a psychological feint. While authorities ransacked the homes of known dissidents, the maps rested beneath the trading floor itself, where the stench of fish and tobacco masked the scent of aging parchment. The betrayal came from within. In 1598, a disgraced Portuguese navigator revealed the library's location to Spanish authorities, hoping for clemency. Soldiers stormed the marketplace at dawn, only to find half the collection already gone, smuggled out in the night by a chain of collaborators. A Jesuit priest hid the Terra Incognita Folio inside a hollow altar. A Jewish spice merchant sewed fragments into his daughter's doll heads. The most damning maps likely ended up in private collections, their truths diluted into sanctioned atlases that credited European discoverers for knowledge stolen from native guides. Yet fragments survived. A 1942 renovation of an Antwerp bakery uncovered a lead tube behind the oven containing a single preserved map, the Cantino Planisphere, smuggled out of Lisbon in 1502. Unlike the doctored version in royal archives, this original showed West African kingdoms with startling accuracy, their borders, resources, and even diplomatic alliances meticulously recorded from local sources. It was a smoking gun, proving that Europe's age of exploration was often an age of plagiarism and erasure. The legacy of these maps lingers in our modern blind spots. How many indigenous territories are still labeled uninhabited on official documents? How many traditional star paths have been rebranded as European discoveries? The Cartographer's underground forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. When we look at old maps, are we seeing the world as it was, or as conquerors wanted us to believe? The parchment may have yellowed, but the lies inked upon it still shape our geography books today. Beneath the spice-scented alleys of Alexandria's marketplace, where traders haggled over saffron and papyrus, the embers of the great library still smoldered, not in its hallowed halls, but in a hidden cellar known only as the Philosopher's Den. While conquerors and zealots above ground celebrated the destruction of what they called pagan knowledge, beneath their feet, a defiant network of scholars preserved the very texts meant for the flames. This wasn't just a graveyard of ideas, it was a clandestine revival of Neoplatonist mysticism, Gnostic gospels, and Hermetic wisdom, the intellectual outlaws canon of the ancient world. The library's survival was a masterpiece of misdirection. Its entrance lay behind a perfumer's stall, where the overwhelming fragrance of myrrh and lotus masked the scent of aging parchment. Visitors had to recite a line from the Corpus Hermeticum, The glory of the all is God, good, beautiful, wisdom, and blessed to gain entry, proving they weren't imperial informants. Inside, the air hummed with quiet intensity. Scribes copied texts by lamplight using ink made from crushed beetles and gum Arabic, while scholars debated whether the soul's ascent required secrecy or revolution. The most dangerous scrolls were stored in clay jars sealed with wax, their contents readable only by breaking the seal, a one-time act of commitment to knowledge. What made these texts worth such risk? Imagine treatises claiming divine truth could be found not in temples, but through direct mystical experience. Gnostic Gospels portrayed a rebel Sophia wisely herself, who defied the demiurge to enlighten humanity. Neoplatonist commentaries mapped the soul's journey through celestial realms, bypassing ecclesiastical authority entirely. These weren't just philosophical musings, they were theological grenades threatening the very hierarchy of the late Roman world. No wonder emperors and bishops alike sent agents to hunt them. The library's rediscovery in 1862 should have been a triumph. A French archaeologist digging near the old market quarter broke through into a vault lined with niches, each holding scrolls so well preserved they crumbled at human breath. But the tragedy wasn't the decay, it was the censorship. Local religious authorities, fearing the text's power, demanded the right to review them before publication. When the manuscripts finally reached Europe, entire sections were blacked out with ink, or worse, pages razored away entirely. A surviving inventory lists titles like The Mirror of Souls and The Untellable Fire, but the works themselves are ghosts known only by their absences. What wisdom vanished in those gaps? We catch glimpses from fragments that slipped through. One scorched scrap describes a ritual to meet God in the marketplace of the heart, blending commerce and spirituality in a way that would have scandalized both merchants and monks. Another, barely legible, hints at an early theory of the subconscious, a map of inner realms predating Freud by centuries. The real loss isn't just the words, it's the alternate intellectual lineage they represented. What if these ideas had flowed freely into medieval thought? Would science have embraced mysticism earlier? Would faith have made room for direct revelation? The cruelest irony lies in how the library's guardians foresaw their fate. A single intact scroll, found wedged in a crack in the wall, bears a warning in looping Greek. They will burn us, but the smoke will rise into the nostrils of God. Even in annihilation, these philosophers had the last word. Their legacy whispers that no censorship is final, no erasure complete, because every idea once thought leaves an imprint on the world's memory, waiting to be rediscovered beneath the next layer of dust. Long before the hysteria of the Salem witch trials tore through the community, the town's marketplace hid a secret far more subversive than any specter of the devil. Beneath the creaking floorboards of the apothecary's stall, where farmers traded pumpkins and dried fish, a vault known as the Witch's Codex held knowledge that would later be condemned as heresy. This wasn't a collection of dark spells, it was a meticulously organized archive of herbal remedies, midwifery techniques, and pagan agricultural lore, passed down through generations of women who understood the land's rhythms better than any preacher. The Codex's most prized possession was the green manuscript, a guide to New England's plants so precise it could identify which fern eased childbirth pain or which mushroom reduced fever. Its pages detailed how to distill willow bark into a tincture for headaches centuries before aspirin was synthesized, and how moon phases affected seed germination. But what made these texts so threatening wasn't their content alone, it was who wielded them. In a world where only university-trained and almost exclusively male physicians were allowed to heal, these handwritten manuals represented a quiet revolution, one where women held the keys to life and death. Accessing the library required cunning. Visitors would approach the apothecary asking for thistle milk, a non-existent product that signaled their need for entry. The shopkeeper would then lift a false barrel, revealing a ladder leading to a cellar where the air hung thick with the scent of drying lavender and crushed mint. Inside, books were chained not to prevent theft, but to ensure they could be hurled into a hidden hearth at a moment's notice. The most dangerous volumes, like the Red Cord, a midwifery manual illustrating how to turn breech babies, were written in cipher, their recipes disguised as pie instructions. Take 2 handfuls of yarrow, 1 entry read, mix with honey as for a tart, and let the patient eat until the blood stills. When the trials began, the Codex became a death warrant. Accusers twisted its pages into evidence of satanic pacts. A drawing of mandrake roots became devil's fingers. Notes on fever dreams were recast as communing with spirits. In 1692, a raid uncovered part of the collection, and the resulting bonfire lit the town square for 3 nights, but the keepers had prepared. Days earlier, a network of wives and servants had smuggled fragments out in flour sacks, hollowed loaves, and even the hems of children's dresses. One surviving scrap, later found sewn into a quilt, contained a single chilling line. They call it witchcraft when a woman knows more than a man. The tragedy isn't just the knowledge lost, it's the lives destroyed to erase it. Modern analysis of the surviving fragments reveals startling sophistication. A recipe for moon tea matched modern understandings of hormonal regulation, while a salve for wounds combined antimicrobial herb science would later validate. How many accused witches were simply women who could read infection in a child's flushed cheeks or ease a neighbor's labor with techniques the church couldn't control? The Codex's legacy lingers in unexpected places. A 19th-century botanist recognized a rare plant from a trial transcript's description, its medicinal properties confirmed decades later. A midwife's diary from 1702 contained verbatim passages from the Red Cord, proving the knowledge outlived its keepers. But the deepest wound remains the unanswered question: how much further might medicine have advanced if these healers had been heard instead of hanged? The irony is cruel. The very texts burned as witchcraft held cures that could have saved Salem from the real horrors, ignorance and fear. Beneath the bustling silk road markets of Samarkand, where caravans unloaded treasures from Beijing to Baghdad, the Mongols hoarded a different kind of plunder, not gold or silk, but knowledge. After their conquests, they dragged scholars and entire libraries back to this crossroads of empires, creating a subterranean archive of stolen wisdom beneath the very streets where merchants haggled over spices. This wasn't just a repository, it was a shadow university holding Chinese treatises on hydraulic engineering, Persian celestial maps more accurate than any in Europe, and even fragments of Indian mathematical theories that wouldn't reach the West for centuries. The real scandal wasn't the looting, it was what happened next. When Timur's armies sacked Samarkand in the late 14th century, they found a trove of manuscripts so vast it took weeks to burn. But the fire wasn't total. Some texts survived, smuggled out in the chaos by scholars who'd spent years secretly copying them. One surviving fragment, now in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, shows Chinese mechanical designs for water clocks adapted by Persian engineers, proof that this underground library wasn't just storing knowledge, but synthesizing it across cultures. Another, a star chart recovered from a mosque's wall cavity, blends Greek constellation names with Arabic numerals and Mongolian dating systems, revealing a lost dialogue between civilizations. What made these texts worth dying for? Consider the Blue Manuscript, a scroll rumored to contain Song Dynasty naval technology, including paddle wheel ships and early compass designs. that could have revolutionized Mediterranean warfare. Or the Samarkand tables, astronomical calculations so precise they predicted eclipses decades in advance, their margins crammed with notes debating whether celestial movements proved divine order or natural law. These weren't just academic exercises, they were intellectual time bombs challenging the very foundations of medieval thought. The library's guardians played a dangerous game. To mask their work, they developed a cipher based on her script modifications, turning sensitive passages into what appeared to be mundane trade inventories. A page listing 100 bolts of silk might actually detail siege engine schematics, while a recipe for honeyed dates could encode chemical formulas for early gunpowder. Their greatest trick, hiding the most controversial texts in plain sight, rebinding them as Quranic commentaries with only subtle markings. A dot of red ink here, an extra flourish on a letter there, to signal their true contents to initiates. When fragments resurfaced centuries later, they hinted at a missed historical turning point. A 16th century Ottoman engineer's notebook references a Samarkand method for building earthquake-resistant arches, likely salvaged from the ruins. Mughal miniature paintings show astronomers using instruments identical to those in the burned star charts. The bitter truth: much of what Europe later celebrated as its scientific revolution had already been worked out in these stolen manuscripts, only to be lost and rediscovered at the cost of centuries. What might the world have looked like if this library had survived intact? Would Renaissance navigators have sailed with Mongol-improved compasses? Would Newton have studied Timurid optics? The tragedy of Samarkand isn't just the flames, it's the realization that progress isn't inevitable. Knowledge, once severed from its roots, can take generations to regrow. Those buried manuscripts remind us that every book burned is a future delayed, and every idea smuggled to safety is a spark waiting to reignite. Beneath the clamor of Florence's Mercato Vecchio, where butchers hacked at carcasses and vendors shouted prices over baskets of olives, a different kind of cutting edge was being honed in secret. Here, in a vault hidden beneath a wine merchant's cellar, composers dared to defy the church's strict musical dogma, scribbling notes that would have been condemned as sacrilege above ground. These weren't just songs, they were audacious experiments in harmony and human emotion. Compositions that treated music not as a servant of liturgy, but as a language of the soul itself. The manuscripts hidden here read like a musical revolution in waiting. One fragile sheet discovered behind a loose brick in 1987 shows a startling innovation: parallel fifths, a harmonic technique the church had explicitly banned for its sensual qualities. Another, its edges charred as if someone tried to burn it mid-flight, contains a melody that shifts between major and minor modes, a emotional volatility considered dangerously evocative. But the real heresy lay in the margins, where composers had scribbled notes like, "Let the notes weep as David wept," or "Here, the heart rebels against the heavens." These weren't just instructions, they were manifestos, asserting that music could express human feelings without ecclesiastical permission. Why was this so threatening? Imagine a world where every chant, every hymn, had to follow rigid rules designed to suppress individual expression. The church dictated not just lyrics, but the very intervals between notes, fearing that certain harmonies could stir passions outside religious control. The Florentine underground rejected this. Their works embraced dissonance to portray grief, used unexpected cadences to mimic the unpredictability of life, and even, according to one fragmentary letter, secretly set forbidden love poetry to music, disguising the texts as psalms by writing them backward in Greek. The library's survival tactics were as ingenious as its compositions, sheets were smuggled in between layers of pork fat to repel moisture and throw off dogs trained to sniff out parchment. Ink was made from crushed grapes and iron filings, indistinguishable from wine stains if discovered. Some scores were even notated on thin calfskin, rolled into candle wicks and burned in emergencies, the music vanishing in smoke rather than surrendering to censors. When fragments resurface today, they offer haunting glimpses of what was lost. A 21st century reconstruction of one piece, Lamento di Fiammetta, based on a recovered bass line, stunned musicians with its chromatic descents, a technique not widely used until Monteverdi a century later. Another, a scrap of a dance tune, syncopates in ways that predate jazz by 500 years. The tragedy isn't just the melodies we'll never hear, it's the realization that the Renaissance could have sounded radically different if these experimenters hadn't been forced underground. The cruelest irony, some of these forbidden techniques eventually seeped into sacred music itself, laundered through composers who claimed divine inspiration. When Pellestrina's Missa Papi Marcelli won church approval in 1562, its subtle use of emotional harmonies echoed innovations from the Mercato Vecchio cellar, proof that even the most suppressed ideas have a way of echoing through time. The real heresy wasn't the notes on the page, it was the truth they exposed, that human creativity, once unleashed, cannot be permanently silenced, only driven temporarily into hiding. Beneath the orange blossom-scented streets of Cordoba's marketplace, where silk merchants haggled under intricate arches, a different kind of exchange was happening in the darkness. The Al-Andalus time capsule wasn't just a library, it was a living argument for coexistence, its shelves groaning with Hebrew commentaries on Aristotle, Christian translations of Persian medicine, and Islamic astronomical charts annotated by Jewish scholars. These weren't merely books, they were the intellectual offspring of La Convivencia, that rare moment when three faiths had built a civilization together. But as the Reconquista's shadow lengthened, these texts became contraband, their very existence a threat to the new order, the library's most dangerous treasure. The Toledo Compromise, a theological treatise arguing that all Abrahamic faiths worship the same God through different rituals. Its author, a rabbi who'd studied with Muslim mystics and Christian logicians, wrote in fluid Arabic, Latin, and Ladino, sometimes all three on a single page. Another scroll, the Physician's Oath, demanded medical care for patients of any faith, directly contradicting the incoming ruler's doctrine of religious segregation. But the real time bomb was a slender volume called the Book of Crossroads, which used geometry to prove that scientific truth transcended any one religion's claims. These ideas didn't just challenge dogma, they threatened to unravel the Reconquista's entire justification. Smuggling them to safety required genius-level deception. Scholars developed a technique called palimpsest nesting, scrubbing the surface of approved religious texts and rewriting banned works beneath in ink made from crushed pomegranate and iron gall, visible only when heated. A dull-looking Bible might conceal an advanced algebra text when held near a candle. Other manuscripts were cut into narrow strips and woven into the spines of legal ledgers, or rolled inside hollowed-out olive wood prayer beads. The most audacious trick involved the marketplace itself. Since Cordoba's censors focused on ports and city gates, the scholars used the daily chaos of commerce as cover. A fruit seller's cart with a false bottom could transport manuscripts to a nearby monastery, where sympathetic monks would rebind them as saints' lives. Some ideas traveled farther than anyone dreamed. A fragment of the Book of Crossroads resurfaced in 15th century Florence, where its geometric proofs influenced early Renaissance architects. The physician's oath reached Salerno's medical school, quietly shaping Europe's first standards of ethical care. But the greatest loss was what never escaped, like the Cordoba Star Catalogue, a collaborative work mapping the heavens using data from Jewish, Muslim, and Christian astronomers. When the library was finally breached in 1492, soldiers reportedly found its last keeper, an elderly nun, calmly reciting the catalogue's star positions as flames consumed the pages. The bitter irony, many rediscovered ideas of the scientific revolution had already flourished in Cordoba's shadows. When Copernicus speculated about heliocentrism, he was unknowingly echoing arguments made in this buried library 2 centuries earlier. The tragedy isn't just the knowledge burned, it's how much bloodshed might have been avoided if Europe had embraced tolerance instead of torching it. The marketplace still stands today, its stalls selling souvenirs to tourists. Few realize they're walking over a graveyard of ideas that could have changed the world, had the world been ready to hear them. Beneath the raucous clamor of London's Bankside Market, where fishwives shouted prices and bear-baiting crowds roared nearby, a different kind of performance was being preserved in secret. Just a stone's throw from the Globe Theatre's wooden galleries, where Shakespeare's plays drew cheering audiences, a buried vault held scripts too dangerous for daylight. This wasn't just a stash of rejected drafts, it was an archive of the Renaissance's ghost repertoire, plays that dared to lampoon monarchs, question gender roles, or skewer religious hypocrisy with a wit sharp enough to draw blood. The most explosive of these, The Isle of Dogs, didn't just get banned. Its authors were jailed and every copy ordered burned. Yet somehow, fragments survived, smuggled beneath the market's filth-strewn cobbles in oilcloth packets or hollowed-out ale barrels. What made these plays worth such risk? Take The Parliament of Women, a comedy where female characters overthrew patriarchal rule with biting satire. Its opening scene alone, a laundress quoting Greek philosophy while dunking a nobleman's shirt in urine, would have scandalized Jacobean censors. Another, The Dutch Courtesan's Reckoning, depicted a sex worker outsmarting Puritan magistrates, turning their own sermons into punchlines. But the real powder keg was King Henry IX, a thinly veiled allegory about succession crises that circulated in handwritten copies, its title character bearing an unsettling resemblance to Elizabeth I's secret negotiations with Mary, Queen of Scots. These weren't just entertainments, they were rhetorical grenades rolled onto the stage of public discourse. The hiding spots were as ingenious as the plots. Playwrights used the market's chaos as cover, slipping scripts to fishmongers who tucked them beneath iced herring, or to ballad sellers who sewn them into the linings of broadside sheets. The library itself was rumored to lie beneath a brothel-turned-pie shop, its entrance disguised as a flower shoot. Actors memorized roles in candlelit cellars, then burned the pages in cooking fires except for the precious master copies preserved in lead-lined chests, safe from both damp and prying eyes. When fragments resurface today, they rewrite theatrical history. A 1992 renovation near Southwark Cathedral uncovered a tin box containing The Convert's Comedy, a lost play about religious conversion so provocative its prologue advised audiences, "Laugh not too loud, lest the bishop's men hear." Another, The Alchemist's Daughter, long assumed to be a Ben Jonson satire, turned out to be the work of Amelia Lanier, England's first published female poet, its heroine a proto-scientist mocking male academia. The real tragedy isn't just the plays we've lost, but the voices they represented: women, freethinkers, radicals who found fleeting freedom in fiction before being silenced. The cruelest twist, some of these dangerous ideas eventually seeped into mainstream drama. Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, with its critique of moral hypocrisy, echoes themes from banned plays he likely never admitted to reading. Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, borrowed from heretical sources, whispered about in Bankside taverns. The underground library's legacy isn't just in the scripts that survived, it's in the shadows they cast across acceptable literature, proving that even the most suppressed truths find their way to the surface, one daring word at a time. Beneath the cacophony of Toulouse's cloth markets, where merchants haggled over bolts of Flemish wool and Languedoc dyes, the Cathars waged a quieter war, one fought with ink and parchment instead of swords. Their underground library, known only as the Last Testament, was no mere collection of banned texts. It was the spiritual lifeblood of a movement the Church had tried to exterminate. Hidden beneath a dyer's workshop, accessible only by lifting a trapdoor disguised as a vat of indigo sludge, the library's codices contained beliefs so radical they threatened to rewrite Christian history itself. What made these manuscripts so dangerous? Imagine a gospel that denied Christ's crucifixion as a physical event, or a treatise arguing that the material world was the creation not of a benevolent God, but of a lesser, flawed deity. The Cathars didn't just reject church authority, they dismantled its foundational myths, portraying the Pope as a false shepherd and the sacraments as empty rituals. Their most incendiary text, The Mirror of Souls, claimed every person carried a divine spark trapped in flesh, a heresy that struck at the heart of medieval orthodoxy. No wonder the Albigensian Crusade slaughtered thousands to erase these ideas. The library's survival hinged on a web of subterfuge, Cathar perfecti. Their ascetic spiritual leaders memorized entire texts verbatim, reciting them to scribes who'd never seen the originals, creating chains of copies without a single vulnerable master. Pages were written in cipher, with innocuous-looking herbal recipes masking theological discourse. A passage on purifying bitter herbs might actually describe rituals to free the soul from materialism. When the Inquisition closed in, the keepers made a desperate gamble, smuggling the most vital codices out in wine barrels, their precious cargo cushioned by grape skins to muffle telltale rustling. A handful reached Italy, hidden among the belongings of merchants fleeing persecution. One, the Book of Two Principles, resurfaced in a Florentine monastery's attic centuries later, its margins filled with annotations by a young monk who'd evidently grappled with its ideas before sealing it away. Another fragment, discovered in a Venetian palazzo's wall during renovations, contained a Cathar creation myth so vivid it depicted angels weeping as they fashioned the first human bodies, a stark contrast to Genesis' triumphant tone. The tragedy isn't just what was lost when the rest burned in the great pyres of Montségur, it's the questions we can never answer. How many other dissenting Christianities were erased by the medieval church's monopoly on truth? What might Western spirituality look like today if these alternate paths had survived? The Cathar codices whisper a haunting possibility that history's winners didn't just write the books, they burned the competition. Yet even in fragments, these texts prove that no orthodoxy is ever as monolithic as it claims. Beneath the veneer of sanctioned belief, heresy always flickers, waiting for its chance to speak again. Beneath the drunken revelry and lawless chaos of Port Royal, where pirates once swaggered through streets lined with brothels and taverns, a different kind of treasure lay buried, not gold doubloons or stolen jewels, but secrets inked onto water-stained parchment. The pirate's ledger wasn't just a record of plundered cargo. It was a black market encyclopedia of the Atlantic underworld, detailing everything from bribed governors to secret alliances between buccaneers and escaped slaves. When the Great Earthquake of 1692 swallowed half the city into the sea, the ledger's iron-bound chest sank with it, but not before a handful of pages were ripped free, floating to the surface like whispers from the deep. What made these waterlogged fragments so explosive? One surviving sheet lists payments to Jamaican officials for harbor oversight, a polite term for turning a blind eye to stolen Spanish galleons. Another, singed at the edges as if someone tried to burn it, chronicles a clandestine agreement between pirates and the Maroons' communities of escaped slaves to raid plantations in exchange for weapons and ships. But the real revelation lies in the margins, where hastily scribbled notes hint at something even more dangerous: coded maps to hidden caches of uncut gems and silver, loot so vast it could have bankrolled rebellions across the Caribbean. The ledger's existence was an open secret among Port Royal's elite, though none dared admit it. Kept in a vault beneath a bustling chandlery, its pages were updated by a disgraced ship's purser who'd lost his tongue to a Spanish cutlass, a gruesome insurance policy against loose lips. Entries were written in a blend of nautical shorthand and French argot, with particularly sensitive transactions disguised as mundane supplies. 20 barrels of salt pork might actually mean 20 crates of smuggled muskets, while a cask of Madeira could signify a kidnapped nobleman held for ransom. After the earthquake, when British authorities fished fragments from the wreckage, they quickly realized the ledger's true value wasn't in prosecuting pirates, most were already dead, but in exposing the rot at the heart of colonial rule. One damning page listed payoffs to a judge who'd acquitted the infamous Henry Morgan of piracy charges, proving what everyone suspected. The Crown's most celebrated privateer had been splitting his spoils with the very officials meant to police him. Other fragments vanished into private collections, fueling rumors that descendants of Port Royal's pirates still hunt for the treasures their ancestors logged. The real mystery isn't just what the ledger contained, it's what was lost forever. A surviving inventory references a black folio of slave ship manifests, detailing which vessels were targeted for liberation by pirate Maroon alliances. Another mentions a map to Lucifer's Vault, a supposed trove of Aztec gold melted down to avoid identification. These weren't just records, they were alternate histories of the Atlantic world, proving that piracy wasn't mere lawlessness, it was a shadow economy that undermined empires. Today, conservators painstakingly tease stories from the ledger's salt-crusted remnants. Infrared imaging recently revealed a suppressed entry about a captured Spanish frigate carrying not silver, but hundreds of books, an entire library looted from Lima's monasteries. Were these volumes sunk with the ship, or did they end up in some pirate's private collection? The ledger won't say. Its final lesson is the cruelest: the sea keeps the best secrets, and the dead tell no tales. Yet even these fragments force us to ask how much of history's truth still lies buried, waiting for the next earthquake to shake it loose. Beneath the spice-scented alleys of Safed's bustling marketplace, where merchants traded saffron and prayer shawls under the Galilean sun, the Kabbalists buried something far more potent than any earthly treasure. Their hidden vault wasn't filled with gold or gems, but with words sacred, dangerous words that mapped the architecture of creation itself. These weren't just books, they were portals to the divine, manuscripts so powerful that legend claimed uninitiated readers could lose their minds gazing into their depths. The Kabbalists' vault held texts like the Sefer HaBahir, its pages alive with luminous metaphors, creation as a tree of light, the soul as a spark trapped in a labyrinth of worlds. But the crown jewel was the Zohar, a sprawling commentary on the Torah that read like cosmic poetry. Its passages described God not as a distant ruler, but as a pulse of energy flowing through 10 sacred vessels, some of which had shattered during creation, scattering divine light into the chaos of our world. To study these works wasn't just scholarship, it was soul alchemy, an attempt to gather those scattered sparks through prayer, meditation, and secret rituals. Why bury such wisdom beneath a marketplace? The answer lies in Safed's unique moment in history. In the 16th century, this mountaintop town became a magnet for Jewish mystics fleeing the Spanish Inquisition. But even here, their ideas courted danger. Some Kabbalistic teachings flirted with concepts that alarmed rabbinic authorities like reincarnation, or the notion that human actions could literally repair the fabric of the universe. The marketplace provided perfect cover. Beneath the din of haggling, scholars could descend into the vault to debate whether God had a feminine aspect, the Shekinah, or if certain letter combinations held power to alter reality. The library's guardians were masters of concealment. Manuscripts were written in Aramaic cipher, with key passages disguised as folk tales or market inventories. A recipe for honey cakes might actually detail a meditation technique, while a list of spice prices could encode angelic names. Access required more than just knowledge, it demanded transformation. Prospective students underwent years of purification, studying only at midnight or in the pre-dawn hours when the veil between worlds was said to thin. The vault itself was protected by psychological warfare, rumors spread of cursed texts that blinded the unworthy, or of a scribe who'd gone mad copying a particular diagram of the celestial chariot. What secrets might still lie undiscovered? In 1986, a renovation near Safed's old cloth market uncovered a lead tube containing a single parchment. The text, now called the Moon's Lament, describes the moon as a fractured mirror of divine light, a startling parallel to modern astrophysics' understanding of lunar formation. Another fragment, found stuffed inside a 16th century chair, outlines a meditation practice eerily similar to quantum entanglement theory, suggesting the universe operates through hidden threads that vibrate across all creation. The vault's true legacy isn't just in the texts that survived, but in the ideas that escaped their confinement. Concepts like tikkun olam, repairing the world, migrated from Kabbalah's shadows into mainstream Jewish thought, inspiring social justice movements. The mystical notion that every action ripples through cosmic dimensions found echoes in modern chaos theory. Even the Kabbalists' obsession with light as the building block of existence predates Einstein's famous equation by centuries. Yet the most tantalizing question remains: how much was lost? Legends speak of a Sefer HaFarsiman, a book so potent it could only be read once every 50 years, its pages said to contain the true names of God. Whether it was destroyed, hidden deeper, or never existed at all, we may never know. But the Kabbalists' vault endures as a testament to humanity's most audacious quest, not just to understand the divine, but to touch it, one forbidden word at a time. Beneath the grand boulevards of Chang'an, where Tang dynasty officials paraded in silk robes and poets recited verses beneath blossoming trees, a secret hummed in the darkness, gears turning, pistons whispering, the future being drafted in ink and suppressed by decree. This wasn't just a hidden library. It was a workshop of forbidden futures, where imperial inventors sketched clockwork songbirds that could mimic human speech, hydraulic pumps capable of irrigating entire valleys without oxen, and even crude steam-powered chariots dismissed by court philosophers as disturbing the harmony of heaven and earth. The most revolutionary of these designs, the Dragon's Breath engine, survives only in fragments, a charred scrap describing a bronze vessel that could harness the power of boiling water to turn wheels without horses. Another, the Silent Watchman, detailed an automaton armed with a repeating crossbow, designed to guard remote stretches of the Great Wall. But what made these ideas so threatening wasn't their ingenuity, it was their potential to disrupt the social order. A peasant with a steam-powered mill wouldn't need landlords. An automated loom could unravel the silk trade's carefully balanced hierarchies. The Tang elite didn't fear machines, they feared the world those machines would build. The library's guardians were masters of bureaucratic camouflage. Blueprints were disguised as celestial divination charts, their mechanical diagrams hidden among star maps. A treatise on gear ratios might be labeled The Meditation on Cosmic Cycles, while schematics for a water-powered forge were tucked into a manual for feng shui harmony. Access required navigating layers of imperial red tape inventors posed as astrologers or alchemists, their workshops registered as temples for the refinement of Kai. The real stroke of genius, using the market's noise as a smokescreen, the clatter of blacksmiths and the hiss of fireworks testing grounds masked the sound of prototypes being tested underground. When fragments of these designs resurfaced centuries later, they left historians breathless. A 10th century Arabic manuscript discovered in Samarkand contained precise descriptions of Tang clockwork towers centuries before European cathedral clocks. A Jesuit's letter from the Ming dynasty mentioned a self-moving carriage in the Forbidden City's archives, likely a surviving Tang prototype. But the most tantalizing clue lies in a Mongol conqueror's diary, which describes seizing metal dragons that vomited steam from a Sichuan monastery, devices later melted down for cannon fodder. The tragedy isn't just the lost inventions, it's the alternate industrial revolution that never was. Imagine a 15th century where Chinese steam engines powered ocean voyages decades before Portugal's caravels. Picture textile mills in the Yangtze Delta spinning silk with automated looms, while Europe still relied on hand weavers. The library's remnants force us to confront a haunting question. Did Confucian conservatism delay global progress by centuries, or was the suppression of technology a deliberate choice to preserve stability at the cost of innovation? One charred scroll recovered from a Dunhuang cave offers a cryptic answer. Its margin note, written in a trembling hand, reads, "The Emperor fears not the machine, but the minds it awakens." In those 7 characters lies the library's true legacy, not just gears and blueprints, but the recognition that every invention carries a revolution in its design. The Tang dynasty's greatest technological achievement might have been understanding that power isn't just about what you create, but what you dare not unleash. Beneath the muddy streets of Ribe's bustling Viking marketplace, where traders haggled over amber and iron, a different kind of treasure lay buried, not silver or furs, but words carved in stone and whispered on parchment. This wasn't just a collection of sagas, it was a last stand for myths the Christian missionaries were determined to erase. Hidden in a vault beneath a blacksmith's forge, its entrance concealed by an anvil mounted on a pivot, the library held runestones inscribed with stories of Odin's sacrifices, Thor's battles, and Loki's deceptions, narratives that painted the world as a place of chaos and cunning, not divine order. What made these texts so dangerous? Picture a saga like the Song of Ragnarok, detailing the gods' doomed final battle against giants and monsters. To Christian authorities, this wasn't just folklore, it was a rival cosmology, one where fate was woven by 3 women at the foot of a cosmic tree, not dictated by a single almighty god. Even the Vikings' writing system, the cryptic runes, seemed suspect. Their angular letters weren't just an alphabet, they were symbols of power, carved into amulets and weapons to invoke magic. A single runestone hidden beneath Ribe's market might contain a lament for Baldur's death, a spell to calm storms, or a king's lineage tracing back to Odin himself, all heresies in the New Order. The library's guardians used the marketplace's chaos as camouflage. Runestones were smuggled in carts of raw iron ore, their inscriptions covered in soot to appear blank. Parchments were rolled inside hollowed-out drinking horns, their ink made from crushed oak gall and elderberry to resist damp. But the real genius lay in their oral tradition. Even if the physical texts were destroyed, skaldic poets memorized sagas in intricate meter, ensuring the stories could survive in memory for generations. A blacksmith might recite the Lay of Volund while hammering a sword, subtly teaching apprentices the old ways under the guise of a work song. When fragments of this library resurfaced centuries later, they offered glimpses of what was lost. The Ribe runestone, discovered in 1892 under a tavern's foundation, recounts a voyage to the land of frost giants, possibly a reference to Greenland or even North America. Another, the Harrower's fragment, describes a ritual to sing the sun back after an eclipse, blending astronomy and pagan devotion. But these are just scattered pieces. The greater tragedy, the myths that vanished entirely. Imagine a saga explaining the Norse concept of weird, a fate woven by countless threads, not preordained by a Christian god, or a lost cycle of poems about the goddess Freya's role as a ruler of the battlefield, not just a fertility figure. The bitterest irony, some Christian missionaries unwittingly preserved the very myths they sought to destroy. When Snorri Sturluson compiled the Prose Edda in 13th century Iceland, he framed Odin and Thor as clever but flawed heroes, a sanitized version that made the old gods palatable to a new era. But Ribe's hidden library held the raw, unvarnished tales where gods bled, lied, and bargained with giants. Their disappearance didn't just erase stories, it severed a thread to a worldview where divinity was as fallible and fierce as humanity itself. Today, archaeologists sifting through Ribe's soil occasionally find charms or amulets etched with fragmentary runes, a thunderbolt symbol here, a wolf's head there. These tiny echoes hint at a deeper truth. The Vikings didn't just hide their stories to save them. They buried them like seeds, knowing that even in silence, myths have roots. And sometimes, against all odds, they break through the surface again. Beneath the sun-baked plazas of Cusco, where Inca merchants traded maize and coca leaves under the watchful eyes of Spanish priests, an entire language of rebellion was being tied into existence, one knot at a time. The Quipukamayox, keepers of the sacred knotted cords, didn't just record taxes or harvest yields in these intricate string registries. They encoded the forbidden, histories of rebellions, maps of hidden mountain refuges, even astronomical observations that contradicted the Church's geocentric dogma. To the conquistadors, these quipus were pagan nonsense to be burned, but to the Andean people, each knot was a silent scream of resistance, a way to preserve their world in the very fibers the invaders couldn't decipher. What made these twisted threads so dangerous? Take the infamous Chasqui Quipu, a 7-foot-long cord confiscated from a runner near Huamanga in 1572. Spanish chroniclers dismissed it as a primitive tally, but hidden in its complex clusters of knots varying in size, color, and position, lay a detailed account of Manco Inca's guerrilla campaigns against the occupation. Another, the Coila Quipu, recovered from a cave in the 1800s, appeared to chart celestial events with uncanny precision. Its woolen strands aligned to predict solstices and eclipses centuries into the future. These weren't just accounting tools, they were three-dimensional libraries, their meaning woven into the very tension of the fibers. The Quipukamayox employed staggering ingenuity to protect their knowledge. Some cords were dyed with fugitive pigments that faded after a decade, ensuring captured records would self-erase. Others used a technique called Quipukamayox, where critical knots were tied so tightly they'd snap if untied by unfamiliar hands. The most sensitive quipus were disguised as mundane objects, a herdsman's sling, a child's toy, even the fringe of a poncho, their true purpose visible only to initiates who knew to count the knots in a specific sequence. When the Spanish launched their great burning of quipus in 1583, they missed hundreds. Some were buried beneath market stalls where the constant foot traffic compacted the earth into a natural vault. Others were smuggled into convents by indigenous converts who secretly maintained dual loyalties. A few even crossed the Atlantic as curiosities, only to be rediscovered centuries later in European cabinets of wonder, their messages still locked in their fibers, waiting for someone to speak their language again. The tragedy isn't just the quippus we've lost, it's the ones we can't read. Modern scholars have cracked parts of the code, recognizing that not positions represent numbers and colors signify categories. But the deeper narratives, the rebellions, the poems, the star lore remain just beyond reach. A breakthrough came in 2005 when anthropologists studying a quipu from the village of Ribe noticed its knots mirrored the syllables of a local Quechua oral history. Suddenly, the possibility emerged that these chords weren't just data storage, they were tactile epics, meant to be recited aloud by trained readers who'd memorized the oral keys. What secrets might still emerge? A quipu found in a lime, a museum basement in 2021, contained strands of rare vicuña wool, a material reserved for royal messengers. Its knots, when analyzed with spectral imaging, revealed patterns suggesting it documented the arrival of a great sickness from the sea, likely the smallpox pandemic that decimated the Inca nobility. Another, recovered from a Spanish shipwreck, had knots saturated with salt water, as if someone had tried to destroy it mid-voyage. Was it a record of atrocities, or perhaps a map to sacred sites the invaders never found? The cruelest irony, some of the last Quipukamayox were forced to use their skills for the conquerors, recording tithes and confessions for the very church that sought to erase their culture. Yet even then, they wove subversion into compliance. A colonial-era quipu in Cusco's cathedral archives appears to track parishioner attendance, but hidden in its color gradations is a lament for Atahualpa's murder, its final knot tied in the shape of a noose. The quipus remind us that memory is more than ink on paper. It's the persistence of patterns, the stubborn refusal of certain knots to ever come undone. Beneath the wooden getter sandals and rustling silk of Edo's fish markets, where vendors hawked slabs of tuna and baskets of sea bream, a different kind of sustenance was being traded in the shadows. Here, in cellars hidden beneath tea houses and sake stalls, exiled samurai and rogue scholars guarded scrolls that could topple dynasties. These weren't just forbidden texts, they were intellectual katana, sharp enough to slice through the shogunate's rigid social order. From treatises on peasant uprisings to Dutch medical texts smuggled past Nagasaki's watchful guards, this underground library became the beating heart of dissent in a society where even the wrong proverb could mean exile or death. What ideas burned so brightly in these hidden scrolls? Imagine a manual like the Willow Branch Strategy, its pages detailing how farmers could resist unfair taxes by feigning ignorance while secretly organizing. Or the Ronin's Mirror, a philosophical dialogue arguing that true Bushido lay not in blind loyalty to lords, but in serving justice itself, a radical notion in an era when samurai were expected to commit seppuku at their master's whim. But the most dangerous were the Rangaku Dutch learning texts, anatomical drawings revealing the human heart as a muscle, not the seat of the soul, star charts proving Earth orbited the sun, even sketches of steam engines that hinted at industries Japan wouldn't embrace for centuries. These weren't just academic heresies, they were cracks in the foundation of the Tokugawa worldview. The library's survival relied on layers of deception worthy of a ninja. Scrolls were rolled inside bamboo fishing rods or sewn into the lining of festival floats. Some were written in hentegana, an archaic script only certain scholars could decipher, while others used vegetable-based inks that faded when exposed to heat, allowing them to be erased by holding them over a candle if inspectors arrived. The real stroke of genius, hiding the most incendiary works beneath legal gambling dens, where the comings and goings of wealthy merchants provided perfect cover for clandestine study sessions. When the shogunate spies closed in, the keepers adapted like warriors changing stances. After the brutal crackdown on the Oshio-Hyakuro rebellion in 1837, survivors smuggled critical texts to coastal villages in hollowed-out barrels of salted mackerel. One infamous scroll, the Tide Chart of Change, resurfaced decades later in the hands of Meiji reformers, its argument for modernizing Japan's military sounding eerily prescient after Commodore Perry's black ships arrived. Another, the merchant's virtue, which dared to claim traders and artisans were as vital to society as samurai, became required reading among the rising capitalist class that would soon overthrow the feudal order. The bitterest irony, many ideas the shogunate tried so hard to suppress became the bedrock of modern Japan. The very Dutch science they banned as dangerous Western thought formed the basis of Tokyo's medical schools. The peasant rights philosophies they burned as sedition-inspired land reforms that stabilized the Meiji era. Even the willow branch strategy's tactics of quiet resistance found new life in labor movements. These scrolls didn't just preserve knowledge, they proved that no amount of surveillance or censorship can permanently chain the human mind. The shogunate feared books because they understood their power. A single page, passed from hand to hand in secret, can become an army. Beneath the wrought iron balconies of New Orleans' French Market, where the scent of chicory coffee and fresh bayonets mingled with the clamor of traders hawking spices and silver, an entirely different commerce thrived in the shadows. Here, in the damp cellars below the auction blocks where human lives were bought and sold, enslaved people risked everything to preserve words more precious than any currency, testaments of freedom, coded maps to liberation, and whispered philosophies of resistance. This wasn't just a hidden library, it was a living archive of defiance where every scrap of paper, every charcoal mark on cloth, was a silent scream against bondage. The texts that survived tell only fragments of the story. A tattered diary sewn into the lining of a quilt recounts the journey of a woman who taught herself to read by eavesdropping on white children's lessons, her words flowing into margins of stolen ledger paper. They say my mind is empty as a gourd, but I hold oceans. Another, a folded broadside hidden inside a banjo's resonator, bears the lyrics of a work song that doubled as a map, its references to the Old Oak and River's Bend marking stops on the Underground Railroad. But the real power lies in what didn't survive. Imagine the sermons scribbled on tobacco leaves that dissolved in the rain, or the names of informants etched onto bark and fed to flames when patrols came near. These weren't just documents, they were lifelines burning bright and fast to protect the hands that passed them. Preservation demanded impossible ingenuity. Ink was made from crushed berries and rust, smuggled in hollowed-out chicken bones. Pages were stitched into the hems of laundry, tucked inside loaves of pain perdue, or even memorized and destroyed after a single reading. One harrowing account describes a man who tattooed a poem onto his scalp, then let his hair grow to conceal it, a living manuscript carried in his very skin. The market's chaos provided perfect cover. A basket of okra might hide a pass granting freedom, its forged seal pressed with a button instead of official wax. A child humming a seemingly innocent rhyme could be reciting directions to a safe house, the melody itself a cipher. The cost of discovery was unthinkable. In 1855, a raid on a shoemaker's stall uncovered a cache of letters between abolitionists. The punishment, public whippings, and the burning of every scrap was meant to terrify others into silence. Yet within weeks, new words surfaced. A psalmbook with liberation verses underlined in onion juice ink, visible only when held to candlelight. This was the archive's terrible beauty. It thrived not despite the danger, but because of it. Every destroyed text was a martyrdom, fueling the next act of rebellion. What haunts us today is the silence of what's lost. How many narratives were swallowed by swamp water on failed escape routes? How many philosophies of freedom were buried with their authors? A single surviving letter hints at the scale. We are many who write, but few whose words will outlive us. Yet even in absence, these ghosts shape history. When Frederick Douglass spoke of literacy as the pathway from slavery to freedom, he echoed a truth forged in places like this cellar where reading wasn't just education, but insurrection. The market still stands today, its stalls now selling pralines and jazz records to tourists. Few who stroll its cobblestones realize they're walking over a palimpsest of courage, where the real commodity traded wasn't sugar or silk, but the unbreakable idea that no soul can ever truly be owned. The archive's legacy isn't just in the fragments that survived, it's in the proof that some fires, no matter how violently stamped, can never be fully extinguished. Beneath the cobblestones of Milan's bustling Galleria Vittorio Emanuele, where cafe patrons debated art and politics under its soaring glass dome, a group of radical dreamers buried their most dangerous ideas not in books but in capsules. The Futurists, that fiery collective of artists and engineers, didn't just imagine the future, they plotted its overthrow, drafting manifestos so incendiary they had to be hidden beneath the very streets their revolution would one day shake. Their buried cash wasn't a time capsule, it was a time bomb, packed with prophecies of skyscrapers, wireless communication, and even something chillingly close to artificial intelligence, all scrawled in feverish Italian between 1910 and 1930. What made these visions so explosive? Take Filippo Tommaso Marinti's The Tactile Railway, a 1923 blueprint for high-speed trains that eerily predicts maglev technology, complete with diagrams of electromagnetic tracks. Or Benedetta Cappa's Aeroptera of the Mind, which describes painting with light using beams projected onto screens, a dead ringer for modern digital displays. But the real shocker was Enrico Prampolini's Mechanical Souls, a treatise arguing that machines would one day develop intuition, with sketches of humanoid robots labeled L'Automa Pensante, the thinking automaton. These weren't just predictions, they were provocations hurled like bricks through the windows of a society still clinging to horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps. The Futurists chose marketplaces as their hiding spots with calculated precision. Milan's Galleria was more than a shopping arcade. It was Italy's crossroads of commerce and culture, where industrialists rubbed shoulders with anarchists. Beneath its ornate tile floors, the group sealed their manuscripts inside lead tubes, then encased them in the foundations of new construction projects. Some were slipped into the hollow pedestals of public statues, their contents shielded by marble facades. The genius lay in the timeline. They labeled the capsules with instructions to open in 100 revolutions of the sun, betting correctly that future generations would value what their contemporaries called madness. When some of these capsules were accidentally unearthed during metro expansions in the 1960s, the discoveries sent shudders through academia. A 1912 manifesto by Giacomo Balla, Colors of Noise, not only predicted electronic music but diagrammed waveform manipulations identical to early synthesizers. Umberto Boccioni's lost sketches for The City That Moves depicted pedestrian walkways layered above streets, a precise blueprint for today's elevated urban greenways. Most haunting was Antonio Santiglia's Città Nuova fragments, showing glass skyscrapers with rooftop gardens and subterranean traffic tunnels, a vision so exact it matches 21st century sustainable architecture. The cruel irony, many futurist ideas were suppressed not because they were wrong, but because they were too right. Mareinte's 1909 prediction of words set free from linear sentences anticipated hypertext and hashtags, but fascist censors burned his later works for corrupting youth with impossible fantasies. Ballard's theories on universal vibration as the building block of matter came suspiciously close to quantum field theory, earning him accusations of heresy. Even their failures were prophetic. His designs for flying suits with wrist-mounted controls look absurd until you realize they're basically smartwatches with jetpacks. What's truly unsettling isn't just their accuracy, but their methodology. The Futurists didn't extrapolate from existing tech, they intuited leaps through sheer artistic audacity. They treated the future not as a puzzle to solve, but as a canvas to vandalize with their wildest instincts. Maybe that's why their buried blueprints still electrify us, not because they predicted smartphones, but because they remind us that the future belongs not to cautious calculators, but to those reckless enough to dig holes in the present and scream into them. The Galleria still stands today, its luxury boutiques oblivious to the seismic visions beneath their feet. Visions that prove the most dangerous thing you can bury isn't a secret, but a mirror. The legacy of these hidden libraries isn't just about the books they saved, it's about the alternate timelines they made possible. Consider how differently history might have unfolded if the Alchemists' Vault beneath Paris had been discovered and destroyed before its formulas influenced early chemistry. Or what if the Cathars' secret codices had all burned, leaving no trace of their radical theology to challenge medieval dogma? These libraries were more than time capsules. They were lifelines for ideas too dangerous to breathe in the open, ensuring that no single authority could ever fully control the boundaries of human thought. Take something as fundamental as the concept of human rights. The scrolls hidden beneath New Orleans' French market didn't just document suffering. They articulated philosophies of equality and freedom that predated the Declaration of Independence by generations. A single surviving letter from that underground archive, written in rust-based ink on a scrap of burlap, declares, "No man owns the stars in another's eyes." These words, whispered between enslaved people and copied in secret, became intellectual kindling for abolitionist movements across continents. The same pattern repeats in Safed's Kabbalist texts, where mystical notions of divine sparks in every person laid groundwork for modern human dignity debates, and in Cordoba's interfaith scrolls, which argued for religious coexistence centuries before secularism entered mainstream discourse. Yet the most profound impact might be on science itself. The forbidden astronomy charts from Prague's marketplace bunker didn't just predict eclipses, they suggested a universe governed by mathematical laws rather than divine whim. When these ideas resurfaced during the Enlightenment, they didn't just challenge the Church, they rewired humanity's relationship with the cosmos. Similarly, the Tang dynasty's buried blueprints for steam engines and automatons hint at an industrial revolution that could have bloomed in 8th century China, altering the global balance of power forever. These libraries didn't just preserve knowledge, they preserved possibilities, roads not taken that still whisper to us from the past. What's haunting is how much we've lost. For every surviving fragment, like the green manuscript from Salem's underground apothecary, with its eerily accurate herbal remedies, countless others vanished without a trace. The Viking sagas burned in Ribe's market square might have contained Norse cosmologies that reshaped our understanding of pre-Christian Europe. The full Toledo Compromise from Cordoba's cellar could have offered a blueprint for religious tolerance that spared millions from persecution. Their absence leaves gaps in our collective memory, like missing pieces in a mosaic where we can sense the larger picture but never fully see it. And what of the libraries still waiting to be found? Historians speculate about the fate of the Maya's vast codices, most destroyed by Spanish missionaries, but rumors persist of a hidden chamber beneath a Guatemalan marketplace, where traders once smuggled bark paper books beneath baskets of cacao. Others search for the lost archives of Timbuktu's underground scholars, who reportedly buried thousands of manuscripts beneath the sand during invasions, their locations known only to generations of griots. Even in modern times, dissidents from Warsaw to Hong Kong have stashed digital archives in unexpected places, from the hollowed-out frames of food stalls to the false bottoms of street vendors' carts. The tradition continues because the need never ended. The ultimate lesson of these hidden libraries isn't just about the past, it's about the fragility of truth in any era. Every time a marketplace seller preserved ideas that power tried to erase, it proved that knowledge has a way of outliving its suppressors. The parchment may crumble, the ink may fade, but the impulse to question, to imagine, to resist, that never goes quietly into the dark. As long as there are those willing to bury truths today so they might bloom tomorrow, the chain remains unbroken. What we're really uncovering in these vaults isn't just books, but the stubborn heartbeat of human curiosity itself. The story of these hidden libraries isn't just about dusty manuscripts or clever hiding spots, it's about the unstoppable force of human curiosity. Every time a forbidden text was copied by candlelight, every time a scholar risked their life to smuggle a scroll across borders, they were proving something radical. Ideas are indestructible. You can burn the paper, silence the voices, even erase the names of those who dared to think differently, but the questions they asked, the truths they uncovered, will always find a way to resurface. Think about the sheer audacity it took to preserve these works. In an age without digital backups or cloud storage, knowledge survived because people wove it into the fabric of everyday life, sewing rebellious poetry into quilt linings, carving heresies into the undersides of market stalls, or even swallowing wax-sealed messages to carry them in their own bodies. These weren't just acts of preservation, they were acts of defiance, a refusal to let fear dictate what could or couldn't be known. And here's the remarkable thing, these hidden libraries didn't just save ideas, they transformed them. A star chart buried beneath Prague's butcher shops might later inspire Galileo. A medical text smuggled out of Bologna's underground could resurface in the notes of a Renaissance physician. The echoes of these secret archives ripple through our world in ways we're still discovering. That textbook you studied in school, that scientific theory you take for granted somewhere in their lineage, there's likely a fragment that survived because someone, somewhere, decided the truth was worth more than their safety. As you walk through your local market today, past food stalls and flower vendors, consider this. Beneath the ordinary lies the extraordinary. Maybe there's a cellar under that cafe with stacks of forgotten vinyl records preserving banned music. Perhaps the antique shop down the street has a hollowed-out drawer holding someone's outlawed diary. History isn't just something we read about, it's something we stand atop, often unaware of the battles fought below our feet for the right to think, to question, to imagine differently. So the next time you pick up a book, remember, it's more than ink and paper. It's a torch passed through centuries, lit by hands that refuse to let the dark win. If this journey through the shadows of history has sparked your curiosity, pay it forward. Share it with someone who believes ideas matter, and ask yourself, in a world that still tries to silence uncomfortable truths, what stories would you hide to protect? The conversation doesn't end here. Press like if you're ready to keep unearthing history's secrets. Subscribe for more deep dives into the past's forgotten corners, and drop a comment below. What hidden chapter of history should we explore next? Until then, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop digging for the stories they didn't want you to